You remember the saying from Isaac Newton saying, if I see further, it is because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And just as Isaac Newton saw further, I think we here in Spain and in many parts of Europe have the opportunity to learn from people who have either already had experience in where we are currently having some maybe difficulties or some challenges that we have to overcome. And with that in mind, I would like to welcome you all to this roundtable where I can learn from these four people and we can hopefully all enjoy some of the knowledge that they should share. So this is the Moeve round table here, and it is by far the most international panel. Now, though two of us live in Spain, we are all citizens of the world, I think we would all agree. So let me just present the people here and correct me if I get anything wrong. Maya Ben Dror is an expert in transportation policies, and she has led the mobility CEO community of the World Economic Forum. She's almost 2 decades of experience in public and private sectors, and she's led innovative projects such as the adoption of credits and zero-emission vehicles in China, the creation of BestEVs, which is the first global ranking of electric vehicles based on user data, and of course, the Battey Swamp model at Better Place. She is also the co-founder and COO of ComplexChaos and venture partner at Next Gear Ventures, correct?
Yes, that's
welcome to the table, Maya.
Thank you. And Chairperson of Women in Mobility.
That as well, thank you. Then we have Sampo Hietanen. He is literally the father and pioneer of mobility as a service. Now, we have agreed not to use too many acronyms, but MaaS, I think, is a valid one that we can all agree on. So mobility as a service aims to combine the different modes of transportation into a single platform accessible to users. His work at MaaS Global with the WIM app, an application for this, is a clear example of how technology can promote more efficient mobility, even in professional transportation. We also have with us Roger Atkins, founder of Electrical Vehicle Outlook, an absolute expert in electric vehicles, and with, I believe, around 40 years of experience in the automotive sector. See? And a Spanish speaker, apparently. He is recognized for his capacity to forecast trends and challenges in the sector, in charging infrastructure, and in battery autonomy. Roger is as well an influential voice in the e-mobility, let's call it a revolution. Yeah, welcome to the table here.
Gracias. Buenos dias, electricos cowboys.
And of course, with us, we have Pierre Sachet, who is the Executive Vice President of Mobility and New Commerce at Moeve. He's an expert in the energy industry, and through his extensive experience at different companies, he's acquired a disruptive vision of more sustainable mobility in the future. And one thing I find very interesting about Pierre is he is always customer-centric as well. He has this customer-centric view of how the future should be developed. Right, Pierre?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, thank you very much all for joining me here. And I think we should start it all with a little video that we have prepared here, because this here roundtable is based on Moeve, which is maybe not a name that is familiar to that many, but certainly this is the evolution of a company that is nearly 100 years old. So such a big transformation, I feel, need a little bit of an introduction. So if we could please roll the video. So this future has a future. Pierre, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what this means, this change from Cepsa to Moeve.
Yes, thank you, Lars. And good morning, everyone. Good morning to my esteemed colleagues. It's a real pleasure to be having this discussion today. Moeve is just the natural consequence of what we have been executing in our roadmap, which is called Positive Motion. It was communicated to the world in 2022. And at some stage, when we see where we are in this execution, what we have ahead of us, and also the fact that we have already sold 70% of our portfolio of exploration and production. There's no way back. And we believe it's the right moment to naturally move towards green molecules, which is the purpose of Moeve, and sustainable mobility. These are the two key pillars. And as a consequence, to just have that new commitment to the world through a new identity, a new expression of a personality, which is a commitment and also a way to accelerate that very deep transformation. So this is very quickly summarized what Moeve is about.
Transformation is, I believe, the key word. And I think that's at the core of what we're discussing here today as well. We want to understand where we are. So the first part of our discussion here should focus on where we are today, because if you know where you are, it is easier to know where you're going, I feel. So Europe as such seems to have different paces of innovation, different pace of adaptation of electric mobility. And Roger, perhaps you could help us clarify where we are today and how we've gotten here. Why is there such a disparity amongst the different countries and adaptation of electric mobilities around?
Okay, can I just quickly say something about, I don't often sit in front of a presentation with dinosaurs on it. That's pretty cool. Yes, I've been in auto for 40 years. Yes, I've been in around electric vehicles for 20 years. So I'm going to answer your question about the oil and gas industry is that they know how to make energy. They know how to distribute energy. And in a conversation I had last year with Professor Stan Whittingham, one of the three principals who invented the modern lithium-ion battery, he began his career at ExxonMobil. They sponsored his initial work with the team on making a battery that would work in an electric vehicle, which seemed a bit counterintuitive maybe to an oil company going back many, many years. And I asked Stan, well, who is going to help develop further now battery technology and capability? And he said, quite likely, the oil and gas industry. Why? Because they've got a ton of money. And a lot of this transition involves a huge amount of money. It's unavoidable. Now, to answer your question, we're seeing a radical change in two huge industries, energy and mobility, and they're happening at the same time. Basically, energy hasn't changed for 100 years. How we make and distribute electricity, sort of the same. Now it's radically changing. Mobility, we've had the invention of the car, the passenger car, suck, squeeze, bang, blow. That technology, that's how it works. That's not like a funny joke. That is how the internal combustion engine works. And it was due to change anyway. Forget the environment for a moment. It just needed a reboot, a new operating system. In Europe, policy has driven the adoption of electric vehicles. So where have we seen the strongest policy? Norway. Where do we see the highest take-up of electric vehicles? Norway. Is Norway a typical country in the EU, in Europe as a geography? No, it's not, because it's a very wealthy country. Ironically, wealthy, a lot to do with oil, mostly to do with oil. So there's a bit of an anomaly there. Around the rest of Europe, policy has driven the adoption of electric vehicles. So it's strong in Norway, not so strong in a number of other countries. It's very good in the Netherlands. It's very good up to a point in France. The UK has caught up dramatically in 2019, which isn't that long ago. And we all know what happened straight after 2019. But in 2019, there were 200,000 EVs on the road, battery electric vehicles on the road in the UK. Now there's 1.3 million. So within 5 years, it's dramatically shot up. How's that happened? It's been policy and incentives on charging equipment. It's been incentives on buying and acquiring an electric vehicle. But the one thing I would like to say, without going on more, because we all want to talk, is that we haven't yet democratized electric mobility. And for people that think electric vehicles are just, well, they're expensive for wealthy, well-off people, the reality for that is the electric vehicles that you've had on the market mostly over the last number of years have been the expensive cars anyway. They're expensive petrol cars, they're expensive diesel cars, Audis, BMWs, and Tesla, of course. So it isn't just that EVs are expensive full stop. It's just, to begin with, the choice that's been out there has been expensive cars specific in general as a sector. So now that we're seeing companies like Renault with the Renault 5 arriving, 25, 30,000 euros, that does other things we'll talk about, bidirectional charging, we'll talk about that later. But, it's been a mixed bag, but it's driven by policy. And
At the same time, it's slightly been held back, certainly the last year, by people that have felt it was moving too fast and challenging the status quo too dramatically.
So picking up on that, Roger, can I ask you, Sampo, because the Nordic countries have been very successful in adopting EVs and have different policies. What's the key to the success in the Nordic countries?
I suppose in the Nordics, there's a long tradition of trying to put together strong regulation that helps new types of markets. Like you said, in Norway, it is about finding the right incentives so that the markets could drive. At the same time, except for our dear Swedish friends, we don't have much of car manufacturing. Well, they don't either anymore if you look at the ownership as such.
Well, you're very kind.
That was very kindly said. So in a way, there's a lot of heritage in finding these market incentives that actually drive the businesses to make more. If we take, for example, this Norway of creating incentives so that it's easier to buy. Yes, they're rich as well, but they could have bought also diesel Porsches.
Yeah.
But they ended up doing that because the government helped it in so many ways. Take Finland, for example, where charging, we've been very good in interoperability. Very early on, it was done in a way that, you cannot build charging stations that would not interoperate. And it's these kinds of matters that actually then help. It is, let's say, a longer or harder way to do it, but it tends to boost the markets easier. I think it's in that mentality a lot.
Are the Nordic countries more? Are the people there more easier at adapting to new changes, or is that not specific to the Nordic countries?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
It's always an easy answer to say that, well, the Nordics are so adaptive to new technology. I don't think that they're that much. I think what is out there is all of them are actually very small. I mean, Finland has 5 million, the rest have 5, Sweden has 10 million. So altogether we're smaller than Spain. But there's always been this idea that, okay, the only thing for us to actually make it in the world being so small is that it has to be the first market of this. And there have been some success cases. A lot is built on the last success story of market, which is actually the mobile industry. The logic of how the mobile or the telecom sector is now set up, it was born in the Nordics. So there's kind of a lot of legacy on combining markets and regulation in a way that it actually functions.
But the Nordics have always been environmental, haven't they? They've always been focused first around the world on, environmental technology and, developing wind power and other things
because
like that.
Because we still live in the woods.
But climate tied to wealth too, right?
Maya, you have international experience, well, possibly beyond any of the rest of us, certainly from China. And in China is one of the examples of moving forward together as well as a society towards more electrification. What can we learn from them, and how have they gotten to where they are now in that respect? What are some of the learnings that you take from them?
You give me the tough one.
Yes.
Well, China has a different way of managing its transformation, right? It has been left behind and it had to leapfrog on many fronts. But I want to first say that, if we go back to basics, what is mobility? Mobility is a basic right. Physical mobility is socioeconomic mobility, is the ability to move, to get to services, to education, to healthcare, to meet people, to interact, to keep well-being. So if we go back down to basics, then it's a public good. And it's actually the governments that have to make sure that people are able to move. If they're not able to move, the government is not serving its purpose, which is for the people. And in that sense, I guess that the Chinese have done really well because they understood that in order to be able to leapfrog socioeconomically, to uplift millions, hundreds of millions of people from poverty, they had to be able to allow them to move around. And with that, they realized that the automotive industry and the mobility sector is going to be an economic engine, one of the 3 big economic engines, similarly to Germany, similarly to the US. They've seen the growth, and they also understood that internal combustion cars and the dependency on oil is going to end at some point. It made little sense They couldn't get their hands over the IP, but they could see that, and the Chinese are really good at thinking scientifically speaking, we're going to go to an era where energy is going to be abundant because we have clean energy sources. And you already see that happening in the southern part of China's southern grid. And they realized that they can now innovate. So they started small with a pilot system. So they had 100 cities, 1,000 cars, 2009 already. And we all know that the background of the Chinese government and operations, 5-year plan, 10-year cross-industry plan, it's all coordinated. And with that coordination comes an effort into creating jobs that are going to sustain for the next 100 years instead of holding back to jobs that are already going to be squeezed out. Not just because we're shifting to electric power sources, but also because we're reinventing manufacturing. We're reinventing the way we do things, the way we move. So with that, China was really able to capture a strong momentum.
I find that really interesting. Is that a sentiment that is common amongst companies and government, but also amongst customers and the users of mobility in China as well? Do they appreciate that it makes life easier for them, or do they see this as something that is imposed on them?
So I cannot speak on behalf of the Chinese people, but what I would say, living in China for 7 years on and off, and speaking the language and really integrating the pace by which people are uplifting themselves. Think about refrigerators were introduced in the 80s.
Right.
Most people don't walk around with credit cards. They leapfrogged credit cards. They used WeChat for everything. Already 2006, you could scan an object and know what it is and know how to buy it in seconds, way before we could in the West. So the Chinese consumer, I think, is more engaged with technology as means to move forward,
right?
As means to, be ahead. And in that sense, I would say if the question was, are the Nordics adaptable? I think the emerging markets are more adaptable. I think when you see change within a lifetime, you've seen such a tremendous change, you understand that change is the only constant. And I think one of the risks of being in the developed world today is we're very comfortable in our lock-ins. And we sometimes forget that change is the only constant. We hold on to realities that are just going to hold us behind. And we see that with economies in Europe right now, right? Germany, to speak of one example.
So interesting on leapfrogging on evolution as well. In Spain, please, maybe you can help us understand what the situation is like in Spain. And maybe we can look at that further on later on to see if there's any opportunities to leapfrog such an evolution or such an industrialization of the mobility and the electric mobility here. What's the current situation here in Spain as you see it from Moeve?
Well, as we speak, we are not leapfrogging in Spain. That's a fact. And leapfrog, it's a very interesting concept when it comes to a certain number of geographies. It's a different technology, but when it comes to telecoms, we have seen how Africa has been just moving away from land cable and going to something different. That's why, hope should remain in adoption of new technologies, including EVs, because there will be some surprises. When it comes to Spain, let's start with a very positive note. 3 years ago, it was the first edition of this global mobility call, and on the same stage, we were all crying, all the tears of our body, about permitting and complexity, and nothing was happening, and it was taking a hell of a time to have something working. It's not solved, but it's improving big time. Now, when we start from the demand, which is obviously the key point, demand in Spain is still not bringing traction. We have less than 5% penetration in new vehicles year to date in Spain, which is very low, far below what we were anticipating 3 years ago. And even when you look at the entire BEVs and plug-in hybrids, etc., you reach something around 12%, which is very low. When we look at the national plan for energy and climate, the perspective says that we should have something around 5.5 million vehicles in 2030. This would mean that we multiply by 10 the present situation, which is
a challenge.
At least very ambitious, to say the least.
Yes.
Now, why is it so? And what can we solve in Spain? I mean, permitting has improved, but there's still a lot of complexity. Just because Spain is administratively complex because of the different layers from national to the local mayor. You have regions and many other things, and there are some transversal complexity as well. There is complexity in the way you have mentioned, all of you, subsidies and the subsidy, they do exist in Spain, but they don't reach the final customer at the right moment. So today you need in some stages to wait for 2 years before getting access to the subsidy when you get access to a new car. So the sex appeal of EV is low. And then, of course, infrastructure is complex to develop because of the permitting that I was mentioning. There is no global coordination between private and public players, but all this can be solved. And it's just a question of aligning the planets. And I'm very positive and optimist. And I don't know whether we'll be leapfrogging, but clearly I believe that we are probably at the bottom of this hype curve that we are seeing before, but that we will rebound and accelerate.
And it's not always subsidies that you need. If you want to create markets, if we take Norway, for example, it was things that people liked. For example, that you were allowed to drive the taxis.
Yeah.
You got free parking, you got free electricity, you got these things. Some of them didn't even cost anything. It was just that you thought about the user and what would the user appreciate. If we have a policy, we would want people to drive more with EVs than fossil cars.
Yeah.
It's the framework.
Yeah.
The framework is not in place.
Can I just say, in terms of framework or policy, there's the EU saying to vehicle manufacturers, after 2035, you cannot make petrol and diesel cars anymore. Now, that's interesting because did they ask any of you, put your hands up if you were asked whether that was okay? Did anyone ask you that question? I don't know, because they didn't. I know the answer. But here's something really good that happened yesterday, by the way, or I think the day before. The EU have said to the Chinese, yes, you can come to Europe. Yes, we'll be a little bit more flexible on tariffs, but you will have to share your IP with us. You will have to do what you did to us 10, 20 years ago, which is a version of flipping the script.
What we did to you, yeah.
Yeah, what we did to you. And that, I think, is really significant because to get to a point in 2035 where we don't make petrol or diesel cars anymore isn't just a political statement or ambition. You have to have a plan. You have to know how you're going to do that. How is it going to work in the transition? How is it going to work in economic terms? How is it going to work with the general public? Yeah. You know, to say to people, yes, you can buy a used petrol or diesel car in 2036, but you can't buy a new one. You have to buy an electric one. The only way to do that is if they're good and cheap.
I'll build on that and say coordinated plan. And I think one of the issues in Europe is you cannot have a coordinated plan because you have countries, you have entire industries that are closed behind national borders. And this is not going away for the foreseeable future.
But maybe what we have in common is that we can put the customer at the center of it, right? As Sampo was talking about, it is when the customer choose to be at the center of it that things actually happen. And it might not be incentives, it might be just ease of use or a common sentiment, right? So can I latch on to the customer-centric view on this? Because, Pierre, it was something we touched upon before, where what is currently the customer experience when charging, and what are some of the pain points, and what are some of the ways that these can be overcome, looking at the experience from other countries or other places where this has been better solved already?
Well, I think it's becoming the most critical point because the early adopters, the geeks about EVs, are no longer the main drivers. And you were talking about democratization, etc. And I think we are gradually moving into something more abundant and more popular. And as a consequence, you need to help the customers to enjoy driving electric cars. And what we do within Moeve is relatively simple. First, we concentrate on ultra-fast charging because we believe that true mobility from A to B is ultra-fast. There is no way you should penalize a customer for staying more than 20, 30 minutes at a place. It's not working. That customer needs to be able to pay with everything, his iPhone, any app, his card, etc. And this means that you need to have access to an interoperability network at the same cost for the customer. It should be same price. There should be no premium for that. And this is what we're offering. You should make sure that there is at least a canopy. Why should an electric vehicle driver suffer from the rain or the sun? I don't see the point. So there should be a canopy. And you should, of course, have access to toilets, services, food, etc. So you need to create an environment. And there's another point, which is probably the most important. In Spain, there is still a fear of being short of battery and to stay just in the middle of nowhere with your car and it's even worse, be ridiculous.
Spain is a big country. Yes, it's not like the Nordic countries.
Yes, but it means that what you need to do is to make sure that you multiply the number of chargers through hubs. Hubs bring a lot of comfort to the customer, because then you say, probably this one will not work, but if there are 12 chargers, one of them will work.
Roger, just on the charger side, you've just described canopies, toilets, whatever. All this stuff costs money. The facility costs money, the grid connection costs money. Is this something in reality that the private companies can really do, or does this need public, money to build infrastructure to support this new wave of electrification? Because we hear of charging companies failing because they don't make any money. So how do we square that circle?
If you go, in Spain, there is no real network of ultra-fast charging as we speak. It remains at the beginning of the journey. Okay, it's coming. There are a lot of chargers which are very slow chargers. And of course, the economics are very different. If you go into fast charging, you do it properly, the business case works. And private companies can perfectly do it. Then you need to give them, through concessions, the time to get the money back.
If I might interject on yes, there is a business case. The business model is already there, and we know it. We have countries that prove it. It's just a matter of which pace for which country. And we're speaking in Europe, so it's an easier question. If we were speaking of the world, it would be more complicated. But one thing I want to add, maybe I should have topped up my first answer, and that's energy security. So when we think of a future where energy flows is part of our security system, then do we want to keep it only in private hands? Should it be in public? Is it a basic commodity that we should all have access to? And if so, who's controlling the pricing and so on? So these are questions we haven't strategically answered in Europe. So in China, they have, right? In China, that was always the plan.
It's easier in China.
Yes, exactly.
Is there an opportunity in this? Is there an opportunity to democratize the energy through batteries, through electric mobility as well?
So I worked for Better Place, the first battery swapped model, and until the end, until we went bankrupt. The technology was flawless, the economics, at least the business model was there. And the idea was that the user, back to the user, the customer would basically pay as they go. So in 2011, 2012, 2013, I drove a battery swappable car. Unmanned experience, 5 minutes to switch from a 0 to a 100. And that idea of, I just pay like my mobile services, to your point, completely agree. Instead of paying for minutes that I speak, I pay for kilometers on average that I use my car. And I don't care if I battery swap or if I charge it, doesn't matter. The battery is not mine. The battery is held by, at the time, the company that has a business model with the end user and a business model with a grid company. That's a really feasible way to have the energy flows. And I know I triggered.
Yeah, some
Of course, a lot of points. I sometimes fear this word democratizing because it's used in so many ways. Ford democratized cars to people by making it so that as many as possible could have the access to that. Democratize normally means that you have as many people have access to it. It also tends to have a bit of a clang to it, that democratize means that it's somehow public business or something like this. And to me, this should not be the case. You should have in these new environments, you should have the political aspect of it is possible to actually, in this disruption, to get societal gains, user gains, and business gains. Yes, it needs leadership, And sadly, mobility is a humongous ecosystem, which means that no company alone can do the disruption because you need others in this ecosystem. Of course, users will want stuff, but unless somebody produces, it does need political leadership in this. We do have actually, even in EU, we have good examples. 20 years ago, if someone or some more would have said that roaming for data would be enforced, people would have laughed. It was done. It is actually quite a good achievement. These things can be done.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the customer centricity, there's a bit of veer in that one as well, because most of the corporations that I've worked with, they think about that within their own silo. And this brings to one of the goals, for example. Many countries will now have this goal. Our goal is that, this and this many EVs are sold. And that's a completely wrong goal to have. Because if EVs come with the same logic that it's a single occupancy vehicle, one car, one person, we haven't really solved much.
Yeah.
At the same time, we are in this world where, people could actually use the same car for many. The biggest leap that we could do is, think about it. 20% of household cost is mobility. 76% of that is in the car that is used about 4% of the time. It's an obvious way for creating new productivity. So what should be democratized? What should be really customer-centric is one thing from learning from Toyota is they keep on asking this question to get to the root cause. So what is the root cause that actually Ford's, with T-Ford, what they solved? It's not the car that we want. We want freedom to go to places. And what's actually the most important part of that is the idea that I could. People tend to have in Madrid, you wouldn't really need the car, but you have the car because you could go somewhere. We've asked this a lot in people. If you can solve this idea that I could go to wherever I want, that's the dream. But you can solve that without saying that we need more electric vehicles. We need more freedom for people.
Yeah. So do you know what I really
You need an app.
Yeah, I really like the idea of democratizing energy and mobility in a communist country. In China, I just think that sounds ironic.
Yeah, it does. It does. What I hear, Sampo, is that we don't only need to have it sustainable mobility, meaning ecologically sustainable. It must be economically sustainable as well. If not, we're missing the point completely, and it just won't work. So, with all these things in mind, now we've got 15 minutes left. So I'd like to look at where do we go from here?
Yeah.
So let's see. We've learned some things. We've had experiences around the world, but some of the challenges can be overcome by technology and innovation. Maya, I know that's a place you've been doing a lot of work as well.
Yeah, I've transitioned myself into more the innovation space and the AI space. I'm happy to take that one first.
Go on.
And it's interesting to think of, that basic idea of we just want to move, right? And how do we facilitate for that movement? So completely online, we facilitate for that movement by giving the ability to the people the opportunity, even in their minds, to move to wherever they need to, wherever they want to. And with that, if you go now to the suppliers, to the supply side, you have two things you need for that. One is you need to pump energy into a system to be able to move people faster, or not necessarily faster in terms of ETA, but longer distances with the right cost. But you also need to have a positive experience, which will be software. So to me, these two flows, the flow of energy and the flow of data, are the two flows that are the flows of the future. And I think we've discussed energy flows until now mainly. But when I think about the data flow, during the pandemic, 11 million cars never left the plant, the manufacturing plant in 21 for one reason. We're missing a chip. And with that, we realized that actually 15% of the global production can be held back if you don't have enough chips. And this is 3 years ago. We're now in a position where you have more chips and dependency on processing capacity within cars for the cars to be able to perform better, to keep us safe. Yeah, it's a physical security as well. Then we realized that actually data is part of the profit pool of the future. It's part of where we're moving. And a lot of CEOs, if you listen in capital markets days of the OEMs, you hear them speak about the importance of user experience, and they tie it to the software user experience, the membership-based, and that is the opportunity we've been waiting for. People that have been talking about shared mobility, that concept has already been incepted. How do we capitalize? Who owns the data? That's a tough one. And maybe one more point on China. 2017 is the year in which China has introduced a regulation that every EV leaving the manufacturing plant would have its data transferred to a server that sits physically in Beijing, owned by China Telecom, and all the data is there. And this is where, when you have people, amazing ex-colleagues of mine like Mike Ranoff and great people that are invested in the future of mobility say, well, the automotive is the new device on wheels, but it's a much more sensitive, delicate device because A, it has a physical security attached to it, and because it has sensors that can feel so much more than just our mobile phones, including physical surroundings. So we have to start thinking of the vehicle and the innovation around the vehicle, as well as the security, not just energy security, but other security elements when we think about the...
When I analyze cars, I always say that software is half the experience for the user. One half is the physical thing, but the other half is how do you interact with the car and with the environment and the charging experience, for example. All of this is tremendously important. Roger, how can we ensure that when looking at all this software and technology and innovation, that the user stays in focus, that we center on that? We don't get blinded by all the marvelous things that we can do with technology, but focus on what we should do, what's really best, and move forward. How is that something that users can benefit from?
Well, I think going back to what you were talking about, economics and the reality of everybody's situation, I think you reverse engineer back from what can people afford? What money have they got? Because at the end of the day, whether you're, an innovator, an entrepreneur, a politician, whatever, it all filters down to everybody's normal life, which is you earn this amount of money every month, you have this amount of money to spend, and you do a bunch of things that are important. So I think reverse engineering it back from the economics, and 20% of your net, monthly income going on to transport, of which 90% of the time you don't use, i.e. your car, is madness. So, we're long overdue a change because technology can enable it in whatever form it is. So I can't be specific in your answer because I'm not clever enough, to be honest, but I'm talking about the principle. But one thing I would like to say, and I know this is a sensitive subject at the moment, but what we witnessed in Spain just a few weeks ago, which we've beginning to witness all around the world on a regular basis, where a dramatic climatic meteorological event occurs, and then the local administration and politicians were, I think understandably, given a terrible time for having badly managed it. Well, hasn't the world badly managed this notice of climate change? It's not just a principle, it's not just down in southern Spain that this has happened, or in America, or in Bangladesh, or in Pakistan. If we really want to wake up and smell the coffee, we have to understand that technology is arriving now to take us away from these terrible events that are happening more and more frequently. They're not once in a lifetime events. They're, every other year. Everybody lives in fear now of the wet season. In Florida, you can't insure houses in Florida. So I know I'm going off tangent from your question.
No, I appreciate it.
But I'm just saying, on the one hand, we've got to deal with the big picture, the huge global challenge. But on the other hand, you've got to not ever forget, to your point, people have economics at the core of what they need to do. So just to finish, I don't think the mass adoption of electric vehicles will ever happen, because it shouldn't. Because we've got now the technology and the ability with the things that are coming towards us to give people freedom and mobility without having to own a car. So I'm talking about autonomous connected vehicles, shared vehicles, etc. That's the world that's arriving. I'm sure of it. And as it happens, your old boss, Shai Agassi, I had him as the first guest on my podcast. That's what he said was going to happen. Electric vehicles were enabling technology for a paradigm shift in how we get around the world. So, sorry, long answer to your...
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Sampo, you want to add something?
Yeah, it is about what to do with the technology. We tend to do, we want to talk about, yes, batteries. We want to do, all of those are enablers for people's lives to do with the 20%.
Yes.
I'll take an example of what is big and what is not so big. Yes, getting transport around is big. I would say that a big disruption is the car that you'll never own, because then you have to rethink just about everything in that. But actually for people, we do spend about 90 minutes in transport every day. We don't like it. It's a stress. You actually like the destination. Going here to maybe for tapas, you don't like the taxi ride or that one. You actually like the tapas. But we accept about 90 minutes, and this is what we've done for the last 100 years. 90 minutes we accept as a hindrance for this. What if with the AVs, what if with all of this, I could actually give you back that 90 minutes? So instead of, just sitting there, it could already be your tapas place. It could already be your gym. It could be your office. It could be whatever. And it's these kinds of things. And when we talk about really customer-centric, I like to think that all technology they can ever think of will be there, because probably it actually is. It's just focus on what would be so cool that you would love. It's maybe these things.
Maybe it's a communication issue as well, because maybe customers feel we are trying to limit their freedom, where in fact it is quite the opposite, right? Where mobility for everyone should be something that frees us to be where we want to be.
You need to, this is what the car really defines. It must have been a revelation back in the days when T-Ford came. And in a way you could feel, oh my God, the whole world is open to me for now. And it is such a sensation. And we will always, we can all say that, oh, people are so stupid. They pay so much for this car and only use it 4% of the time. Wrong question and wrong thinking. By preaching, you need to think about, okay, what do I have to give to them so that they get the same sense of freedom? How do I provide that in a new world using all the technology? It's hard.
Yes, and I remember that feeling when I got my first car. The world was open to me. I could go anywhere, whenever I wanted to. How can companies like Moeve better communicate these thoughts about freedom of mobility and the future of being able to go where you want to go and be where you want to be to the customer, so that they don't feel that we are, or that they are being imposed a certain type of mobility, but that they can see the benefits of what's trying to be done?
Yeah. Well,
question as well.
But I will keep it short. I think that we have been living in a very easy world for the last 100 years that you mentioned example. There was one energy, it was one size fits all. Yeah, that was extremely comfortable. And for energy companies, it's super comfortable. And in mobility, it was even more comfortable. So this paradigm is dead. We need to move into something different. And we need to acknowledge that one energy will not be the one size fits all. And this is exactly the view we have, and the use cases, and you don't force customers. You need to listen to them, and you need to just follow the flow of demand, anticipate the evolution of demand. And as a consequence, we strongly believe, and I strongly believe, that the energy you need to be able to provide to your customers, depends on the type of customers, and the use case of that customer, on the situation, and the location. And as a consequence, we need to be able to provide a multi-layer of energies, from electrons to green molecules. And those green molecules could be H2 tomorrow in a liquid or not form. That's another question. And particularly for heavy duty or not, that's another question. It could be biomolecules, which are already available, and they will become massive, but it never big enough to satisfy the entire needs. So there is not a single energy that will satisfy demand for mobility. And we just need to be aware of it. And as energy providers, we need just to stop pushing energy towards the market, but listening to the customer and answer to their demands.
It's a bit like, this mobile. If I have a carrier, I don't really care if they use satellites or fiber or whatever. I just care about the connection. If I call or use my internet, that it functions.
Exactly.
At the right price as well.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that on the customer side. You have the variety of customers, and every customer would change along their lifespan, right? You're a teenager, then you're a parent, you have different needs, and so on. And with that, I owe you guys sort of a mention of gender diversity as well. And looking into the future, let's first look at the early 1900s. You can find news articles of crazy women, a new type of virus that catches women that are riding their bikes. You get this spark in their eyes, and like crazy. The freedom of women started. And I regret to still see in many parts of the world, but even here, security for women, safety, building safety specifically for the right weight, the right ergonomics of women. This has not happened yet.
Starting with safety belts.
Yes, and you only have 13% of leadership positions in the mobility sector globally for women. Europe has committed to 40% leadership positions to women across industries by 2026. Start hiring women for leadership positions, not just because the regulation requires you to, but because if you have women in leadership positions, they'll think about children, they'll think about vulnerable road users, they'll think about themselves when they think about the products and the services that are being provided. And that's critical. It's critical because women are half of the world's population and likely the softer one with a higher EQ. So that would make us happier beings.
So by bringing women into the discussion and into the correct place,
I knew you would bring the topic.
So you'd rather have Alana Trump than Donald Trump as president? By bringing women into the right position in these companies as well, that is a way to ensure not just diversity, but to bring up all parts as well as they glue things together in many ways.
Yes.
It's also to bring this, I've talked about this mobility in quite a lot of places, and I tend to get this illusion. Normally it always comes from, I get to say this, 40, 50 plus men that say that, but we all love to own our cars this and this way. It's, it's just always been like that. And it's kind of thought that everyone is like us and we hold the rest of the whole ecosystem hostage to our thoughts. And then normally I get a woman normally in their 20s and say, I don't recognize myself at all from that. I just like to be free of all kinds of shackles and be able to move conveniently.
Can I quickly say that I think
really quickly, Roger, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, from some of what we've said, I would like to share with you my belief that the future is really exciting. It will be enabled by technology. It's not as dark as some people portray often and make us all very depressed. I think some wonderful things are going to happen, and I think they're going to happen sooner rather than later.
And be open. I would say the one lesson is just be open for change. Try new things. Don't be afraid of failure. Those that are not afraid of failure are leapfrogging.
Be bold.
Absolutely. So I think we're out of time. The clock has turned red there. So thank you guys very much for participating in here. I feel like I learned a lot. Some of the things I've jotted down is that even though policy is a driver in many places in Europe, we want to make sure we don't want to force the customers, but we want to bring them along. I appreciate your perspective of having women along in that as well. There's not one solution that fits all. Yes, you said that. Sampo, you touched upon that as well. I think that's an important message as well. And that I think will also help not to force people into a solution that might not fit them as well. So, guys, really quickly, can I ask for one closing statement? Maybe, Piers, you want to finish it off? And thank you for inviting us here to this roundtable here for Moeve. But I think that's...
My last word is just to say thank you from the guests. I think it was a very interesting, very frustrating discussion because it's too short, as usual. But it's elevating the level of the discussion, and I think it's what we need because we need to take some perspective. And so there is the trench fight, but there's also a perspective, and I think we together are bringing this perspective. And thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for letting us separate from the dinosaurs. Finally,
it's good. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you.